A trembling hand hovers over the Start Game button. The screen cuts to black, then erupts. Crimson floods the player's pupils like ink spilling in water. Cut to Cooper, screaming alone in a soundproofed room. Wires snaking into his skull from an invisible device. Behind him, the walls start to warp, melting like a dream you can't quite wake from. The screen flickers. Game over. But he's still in it. He doesn't even remember when the game really began. This isn't your typical sci-fi setup. This is Black Mirror Season 3, Episode 2, Playtest. A full-on neurological horror ride about how tech doesn't just invade your life. It burrows into your fears. On paper, the plot sounds deceptively simple. Cooper, an American backpacker short on cash, signs up for a closed-door playtest at a mysterious gaming company. The game? A hyper-personalized VR horror experience, one that syncs with his brain and tailors every scare to his subconscious. But the deeper he dives, the harder it becomes to tell what's real, what's simulated, and what's just his own mind folding in on itself. To many viewers, Playtest feels like the oddball of the Black Mirror catalog. A rare, straight-up horror episode. But here's the twist. That's exactly what makes it terrifying. Because Playtest isn't just warning us about cold technology. It's showing us what happens when fear itself becomes a product, something that can be harvested, monetized, and outsourced to your own neural circuits. The episode offers no tidy conclusion. You're left questioning whether Cooper truly experienced anything at all, or whether he was stuck inside a recursive consciousness loop from the very beginning. Light bulb in this breakdown will unpack the following. Why did the creators choose game testing as the framework instead of a classic horror narrative? How many layers of dreams and simulations are we actually seeing? What do Cooper's personal fears reveal about the deeper critique at play? And what exactly is Playtest satirizing tech addiction? Consumer culture? Emotional detachment? The fear of death? Round pushpin, but perhaps the most chilling mystery of all. Why did the protagonist die? Just because he forgot to turn off his phone? What looks like a punchline is actually the most subtle and vicious critique of the attention economy you'll ever see. When Black Mirror meets Resident Evil, the nerves of horror start to twitch. Playtest didn't begin as a psychological horror story. In Charlie Brooker's original draft, it leaned more toward dark comedy. A man joins an interactive game test and slowly loses his grip on virtual reality. That all changed when director Dan Trachtenberg came on board. Known for 10 Cloverfield Lane, Trachtenberg built his reputation on turning small spaces into psychological pressure cookers. And when he took on Playtest, he brought a clear vision: to make a Black Mirror episode that's genuinely terrifying. At the time, this was a rare move. Most Black Mirror entries focused on satire or philosophical dilemmas, not straight-up fear. But Trachtenberg wasn't interested in cheap scares. He insisted that any horror must emerge organically from a character's emotional architecture, not just genre tropes with a tech filter. So the script got a major overhaul. The revised version introduced a subtle but crucial emotional thread: Cooper's strained relationship with his mother. It hides in the background for most of the episode until the final twist. It's her phone call that breaks the simulation and kills him. Light bulb, you thought he died because the tech went haywire? He actually died because of a missed call from home. That right there is Trachtenberg's point. The scariest things don't come from the machine. They come from what we refuse to face. Dan Trachtenberg, Playtest behind the scenes. Hammer and wrench production quirks and narrative pivots. The episode was originally slated to shoot in Tokyo to emphasize a high-tech, experimental vibe. But due to budget constraints, filming was relocated to the outskirts of London, with a crumbling estate subbing in as the Haunted Mansion. The fictional company Saito Gemu isn't just Japanese in name. It's a nod to Metal Gear Solid, Resident Evil, and other iconic Japanese franchises. Even the mushroom chip is a cheeky reference to power-up items in classic video games. In the first version of the script, Cooper's consciousness was simply erased by the system. But the team later opted for something far more ironic and painfully real. A call for mom. That's what kills him. Think about it. You can slay monsters in the simulation. But in real life, one tiny interruption can take you out. That's the dark genius of Black Mirror. It's not the tech that kills you. It's the way you silence the only voice that ever really mattered. Visual language. This isn't horror. It's your nervous system visualized. In Playtest, fear isn't injected. It's triggered from inside you. The entire episode plays like a user-guided fear simulator, and the director builds that illusion using 3 key camera strategies. Together, they unpack how fear is generated, not delivered. Artist palette from adventure vibes to neural static. The first 15 minutes are washed in warm tones, burnt orange, dusty greens, golden browns, like a backpacking travel vlog spliced with a low-budget indie road movie. But once the game starts, the palette drains fast. Saturation drops. Cold blue lights and high-contrast shadows sneak in, replicating the kind of signal noise your brain might generate during sensory interference. The background nearly vanishes in the whack-a-mole test scene as Cooper becomes the only stable thing in frame, mirroring how VR users often experience gaze latency. That subtle sense of lag, where the image lags just behind where your brain thinks you're looking. That's your first subconscious signal that something's wrong. Brick composition cracks as logic collapses. In the early scenes, Cytogemu's office, Katie's interview setup, everything's clean, centered, balanced. Classic symmetry. Visual logic equals narrative safety. But once we enter Harlech House, things go sideways. Literally, the camera tilts. Depth of field fractures. Focus wobbles. Even basic visual continuity begins to glitch. The Josh resurrection sequence? It breaks the 180-degree rule. During blocking, the camera shifts sides mid-dialogue, a deliberate choice to make the space feel psychologically ungrounded. You're not just disoriented, you're not even sure who's watching who. Third-person neural POV, you're not watching, you're being watched. Most horror stories rely on POV shots to put you in the character's shoes. But Playtest goes one step further. In key moments, when Sonia breaks in or when Cooper sees his face morphing in the mirror, the camera switches to a VR-style over-the-shoulder view. Not from Cooper's eyes, but from inside his brain, watching himself from inside out. You don't feel like the viewer. You feel like another node in Cooper's broken consciousness. As Trachtenberg put it, true immersive horror isn't about experiencing the terror. It's about being unable to stop it. Adult red hair character breakdown. Cooper is the perfect consumer in a fear economy. He's not a thrill seeker. He's a classic runaway protagonist. White, Western, emotionally avoidant, checked out from his family, chasing hookups, highs, and experiences across the world. He doesn't want adventure. He wants to outrun his mother's voice, his father's illness, the weight of growing up. And in doing so, he falls right into the trap of tech-fueled self-avoidance, where stimulation replaces intimacy and novelty becomes emotional armor. Katie tells him, "Your brain's a maze. We're just opening the doors." She's not just describing the gameplay. She's reading the blueprint of a whole generation's mental architecture. Brain symbolism, every element is a trap in disguise. The mushroom chip, a fun nod to Mario on the surface, sure. But in practice, it's a psychedelic trigger, a soft entry symbol for altered perception. Cooper takes it willingly. That's the key. He consents to illusion. Harlech House, named after a real Welsh castle known for military sieges and power struggles. In Playtest, it becomes a fear lab where old-world authority is rebranded as internalized mental domination. Josh's return and Mom's absence. One is a high school bully, external trauma. The other is a fading memory, emotional guilt. These aren't just jump scares. They're hieroglyphs of Cooper's unprocessed fear of being forgotten, by people, by memory, by meaning itself. So the scariest thing in this episode isn't ghosts. It isn't the system. It's not even the game. It's your own brain, locking you inside the one memory you've been trying hardest to forget. This isn't a plot twist, it's a cognitive collapse. Every time you think you've woken up, you've only dropped deeper into another layer of the dream. Puzzle piece narrative structure, a maze built on your brain's own lies. Playtest doesn't follow a linear storyline. Instead, it's a layered labyrinth crafted not to surprise you with plot twists, but to systematically break your trust in your own perception. Here's how the episode stacks its reality, not in chronological order, but by psychological depth. Baseline reality, London life. Cooper travels, meets Sonia, gets his account hacked. Onboarding phase, he arrives at Cytogemu and agrees to the test. Whack-a-mole simulation, the first hallucination, sold as an intro to immersion. Harlech House nightmare, fear entities manifest, the simulation turns personal. System glitch layer, Sonia stabs him. Is this still part of the test? We don't know. Return to reality layer, Cooper comes home, only to be forgotten by his mother. The final reveal, Katie announces that Cooper's brain flatlines 0.04 seconds into the test. Each wake-up moment isn't closure. It's just a new fear trigger implanted in your mind by the writers. The structure echoes Inception with its dream within a dream model. But here's the key difference. In Inception, each level had rules. In Playtest, each level is emotionally randomized, built entirely from Cooper's unresolved psychic debris, meaning the real architect of the story's pace? Not the director, not the audience. It's Cooper's own subconscious system, looping itself into oblivion. Clapperboard Dan Trachtenberg's minimalist suspense is maximum pressure. If you've seen 10 Cloverfield Lane, you'll recognize Trachtenberg's signature move. Make the audience think they're getting closer to the truth. Then flip the entire map and show them they've been heading the wrong way all along. In Playtest, he brings that disorientation full force. Every scene happens in a sealed environment, an office, a mansion, a chamber. Every time someone says you're awake, the camera subtly signals you're not. Dialogues and sound effects come with a split-second lag, mimicking neural misfires. It's not in-your-face surrealism. It's a slow, surgical detachment from reality, designed to make you feel what Cooper feels. I can't tell what's real anymore, and I don't know when I lost the thread. Book's horror story or neuroscience prophecy? Depends who you ask. The episode's nested design and emotional core have made it a magnet for interdisciplinary interpretation. Here are 3 dominant schools of thought. Brain, the neuronarrative camp. They see Playtest as a dramatized exposure therapy for modern consciousness, even before science can fully decode the brain. Black Mirror simulates what a breakdown might feel like from the inside out. Key focus, how the story visualizes subconscious trauma triggers like missed calls from mom generate emotional residue, dreams, echo abandonment. Josh's sudden appearance reactivates high school shame manifests as violent hallucination. The homecoming TV scene glitch a visual metaphor for multisensory collapse. Video game the game philosophy crowd. They interpret Playtest as a critique of player consciousness and emotional exploitation. You're not playing the game. The game is playing your mind. They argue that hyper-personalized immersive media doesn't empower users, it data mines their vulnerabilities. The scarier it gets, the deeper it digs into your unhealed wounds. Classical building the cultural political critics. They read the episode as an allegory about male emotional avoidance. Cooper is the modern man untethered, ditching responsibility, skipping grief, dodging vulnerability. He seeks distraction in sex, travel, and gamified horror. But in the end, it's not the monster that kills him. It's the memory he never made peace with. From patriarchy to the tyranny of attention. Cooper didn't die inside a game. He died in an emotional blind spot, one crafted by his own firewall of avoidance. On the surface, Playtest is high-concept sci-fi horror. But beneath that skin, it's deeply personal. It's a story about a man haunted by his father's death, dodging calls from his mother, and ultimately being killed by the very feelings he refused to face. His is not just a personal tragedy. It's a mirror held up to a society that punishes vulnerability, represses emotion, and systematically denies us connection in the name of freedom. Let's break that down through 3 key lenses. House, the collapse of family myth, and the feedback loop of guilt. Cooper's father suffers from Alzheimer's. His mother carries the burden of caregiving, silently, stoically. It's a classic setup, the collapse of patriarchal authority, followed by the emotional debt falling on the maternal system. Cooper's response. He runs. And society frames this not as abandonment but as self-discovery. A man taking time to find himself. But really, it's an evasion mechanism dressed up as a rite of passage. It's not that I don't want to go home. I just don't want to hear her voice. Cooper's inner monologue. And the cruelest irony. That missed call, that silenced voice, is what ultimately kills him. Mobile phone the attention economy as executioner. We now live in a world where attention is currency. If people are watching you, you exist. If not, you fade. Cooper's death isn't caused by a tech glitch. It's a metaphor for being disconnected in a world that only values visibility. No calls returned. No emotions expressed. No grief processed. In the system's eyes, that's not sadness. That's non-participation. And in the logic of an algorithmic society, non-participation equals non-existence. He didn't get punished. He got deleted. Coffin neural death as ethical dilemma. You're not dead. You've just been derecognized. The most chilling moment of Playtest is this. Cooper dies 0.04 seconds after the game starts. In that fraction of time, he lives a full nightmare, fear, chaos, memory collapse. He experiences death fully, which raises an existential question. If technology can simulate death inside your consciousness, what even counts as death anymore? We're not talking about science fiction. We're talking about a future where death is gamified, quietly, contractually, invisibly. No violence, no courts, just a signature and a little "I agree" checkbox. And when the system decides you've disconnected from meaningful engagement, you don't get punished. You just get turned off. Chart decreasing. This isn't a glitch in the system. This is the system. Fear is no longer a biological alarm, it's a monetized reaction. Death isn't the end, it's a data collapse framed as user error. Family isn't sanctuary, it's a deprecated node in your emotional operating system. So when Cooper dies, it's not an accident. It's not karma. It's not a ghost or a vengeful AI. It's the cold, implicit rule of our age. You can unplug from the world anytime you want, but don't expect to be let back in. What makes Playtest so brutally honest is that it doesn't give you a villain. No evil tech CEO. No rogue AI. No glitchy code. Just the system doing what it was designed to do. Wait for you to be distracted. Wait for you to hide. Then quietly finish the job you already started. Why is Playtest the most emotionally extreme episode of Black Mirror? Because it's not about who killed him. It's about a system that was never designed to let him live. Unlike Nosedive, which resonated broadly through social commentary and meme culture, Playtest became one of the most emotionally divisive entries in the series. Scroll through Reddit threads, critic columns, or YouTube comment sections, and you'll see the split. Small Orange Dime in one camp called it Black Mirror's most authentic nightmare because it took tech horror out of the external devices and planted it right inside your brain. No escape, not even in dreams. Small Orange Dime on the other side found it cold, overly engineered, lacking warmth, all structure, no soul. Why the split? Because Playtest isn't a commentary on society. It's a direct assault on your perception of reality itself. It's not here to teach you a lesson. It's here to rip out the stabilizer in your head and whisper. What you believe is real might just be a hallucination the system hasn't rejected yet. Firecracker power, control, and the question of responsibility. Who really killed Cooper? On the surface, it's simple. He forgot to turn on airplane mode. His mother called. It disrupted the system. And he died. But dig deeper, and Playtest reveals a chillingly modern question. In an algorithm-run experiment, who has the final say over human life? Let's break down the three parties complicit in this slow-motion execution. Office building the game company, Cyto-Gemu. They didn't see Cooper as a person. He was a data test unit, a profile to be pushed until it broke. Their contract had no meaningful safeguards. They sold the experience of authentic fear, but chose to ignore the risk of real harm. Adult briefcase Katie, the emotionless technician. Calm, efficient, but ultimately, she represents the cold face of algorithmic ethics. To her, Cooper's collapse isn't a tragedy. It's just a line on a report. Test duration, 0.04 seconds. Not a death. Not a consciousness collapse. Just a data point that failed to load. Man standing Cooper, the willing participant. He ran from grief. He avoided the call. He signed the waiver, skipped the fine print, and dove headfirst into curated fear because it felt easier than real pain. He stands in for the modern user, hungry for experiences, allergic to emotion, hyperconnected, but deeply unwilling to confront anything real. Magnifying glass tilted left, so what's the conclusion? There's no clear villain, no grand evil. Just a perfectly reasonable sequence of decisions. Each one small, each one rational. That together led to a man's quiet erasure. No pedestrians. How did a legal experiment bypass every red flag? The most dangerous part of Playtest isn't the neural interface. It's the default setting. You agreed to the terms. You clicked accept. You believed the fear would be manageable. Cooper wasn't coerced, but he was never really warned either. He wasn't brainwashed, but he was never given the tools to understand the emotional risks. Which brings us to one of the hardest ethical questions of our time. If it's voluntary, how far can tech go before it becomes inhumane? We're already facing it every day. Social platforms bury your privacy rights in terms of service. AI companies mine your face to train surveillance models. Game developers use emotional feedback loops to engineer addiction cycles. Playtest just takes it to its final form. A world where you can legally, voluntarily, surrender the right to your own death. Speech Balloon Katie's final line is the coldest and most honest in the entire episode. 0.04 seconds. That's all it took. It isn't just a statement. It's a quiet fracture between tech ethics and human dignity. A soundless snap you don't hear until it's already too late. The adaptive fear system isn't fiction, it's already in prototype. You thought you were watching Playtest. You were actually reading a user manual for the next generation of immersive tech. In the episode, Cooper volunteers for a game that generates content based on his individual fear profile, adapting in real time to his subconscious triggers. Sounds futuristic, right? But the real world is already knocking on that door. Magnifying glass tilted left real-world parallels. Brain-effective computing, emotion-reading technology. Companies like Effectiva and Realize are developing facial recognition software that reads micro-expressions, vocal tone, and eye movement to detect emotional states, joy, tension, anger, fear. Game developers are now testing ways to integrate these signals into gameplay engines, so the game responds to how you feel, not just what you do. Brain-computer interfaces, Meta and Sony. Meta, Facebook, has been working on nonverbal brain interface control for VR, allowing users to shape environments with thought alone. Sony filed a patent for a gaming system that uses sensors and cameras to read player stress levels and adjust difficulty and emotional tone on the fly. These aren't just quality-of-life features. They're the first steps toward emotional customization of reality. Playtest doesn't predict the future. It previews its final form. Brain, the ethics of experience economy and sensory surrender. Cooper didn't chase death. He stumbled into it, packaged as a test experience. That's the trick of modern immersion. When everything is marketed as an experience, you don't even realize when you've signed away your right to perception. Apple Vision Pro and immersive ad tech. New headsets like Apple Vision Pro aren't about letting you play. They're about pulling you under. Ad agencies are developing systems that track gaze duration plus emotional reaction to deliver precision ads inside immersive environments. You glance for a second, the system knows you'll come back and starts building your next dream for you. Therapeutic-style entertainment as profiling. Netflix's Bandersnatch wasn't just a choose-your-own-adventure experiment. It was a psychographic data mine, recording how you choose as a map of who you are. Platforms like Spotify and YouTube push content not to expand your taste, but to reinforce it, bubble wrapping you inside an algorithmic comfort zone. Cooper's real trap wasn't Harlech House. It was the moment he agreed to be guided. From then on, his reality was no longer his own. Mobile phone, the rise of attention nomads, cognitive paralysis at scale. The true horror of Playtest isn't the monsters Cooper sees. It's the fact that he can't choose what to believe anymore. His attention architecture, the thing that helps you filter, prioritize, assess truth, has been overwritten by the system. And here's the scariest part. We're raising an entire generation that may never learn how to protect that architecture in the first place. Where do we go from here? The answer isn't to destroy the system. It's to rewrite the core protocol of being human. White heavy checkmark tech countermeasures, open source, transparency, and disconnection. Let's be clear, technology isn't the enemy. Opaque technology is. Here's what resistance looks like in the real world. Bar chart open score systems, fair score credmark. Platforms where users can see their own behavioral weightings, a kind of emotional credit report. You can request corrections, challenge bias, and view how the algorithm interprets your decisions. No mobile phones digital detox movements. In multiple countries, young people are organizing 48-hour disconnect challenges to test whether they can emotionally stabilize outside social feedback loops. Some universities have even created algorithm quiet zones that disable recommendation engines on campus. Man in lotus position, the slow media movement. An emerging philosophy that urges intentional, bounded media consumption, not immersive for immersion's sake, but selective contact with content. Examples include turning off autoplay, avoiding comment sections, setting platform time limits, capping the number of videos viewed. Each of these is based on one simple truth. You can't always control the system, but you can control how you access it. Graduation cap education as firewall, rebuilding the muscle of perception. In Playtest, Cooper's tragedy wasn't that he entered the system. It's that he lost the ability to recognize it. That's why education needs to start with cognitive decoupling. Teaching a generation how to tell what's real and how to resist what isn't. What's already happening? Finland has introduced cognitive immunity as a high school requirement, including modules on algorithmic transparency and media literacy. Japanese universities are piloting digital emotion studies where students log how social media affects their emotional baselines over time. Some U.S. schools are running media ethics mock trials where students act as platform ethics boards, judging the limits of algorithmic influence. This isn't just about digital skills. It's about installing a mental firewall. When the system tells you don't overthink it. School should teach you think harder anyway. Books culture as decode, storytelling is still our oldest weapon. Faced with the machinery of algorithmic illusion, we still have one ancient tool. Telling stories. Brain recommended Rebellion Watchlist. Sorry to Bother You, a surreal comedy that asks, is the voice you use at work really your own? Perfect Blue, an anime masterpiece on how public identity can fracture private sanity. The Circle, a dystopian warning about how constant approval erodes personal freedom. Her, a sci-fi love story so gentle it's terrifying, a relationship cocooned in artificial softness. Each one cracks open the immersion loop, asking, who gave you this feeling? And what did they want in return? Open Book 3 must-reads for escaping the rating system. The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, Shoshana Zuboff. Introduces behavioral surplus. Your actions are mine not just for what they are, but for what they might become. The Transparent Society, Byung-Chul Han. A philosophical lens on how the more you show, the less free you are. The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, Irving Goffman. The Cornerstone of Persona Theory, an ideal framework for analyzing Cooper's identity collapse. Speech Balloon Playtest ends with his death. But that's where our thinking should begin. Cooper died in a 0.04-second simulation. We can't afford to treat cognitive death as just another form of entertainment. He never got the chance to wake up. We still do. Magnifying glass tilted left. This is the hidden strategy of the attention economy. TikTok doesn't recommend, it trains you. Every time you hesitate on a certain video, your pause time and micro-expression are logged and folded into your interest graph. From then on, you're not shown what you chose. You're shown what you're most likely unable to resist. Briefcase rating systems are quietly choosing who deserves resources. Job interviews, tools like HireVue use facial emotion analysis to decide if you're a good fit. Insurance, providers scrape social media to assess your lifestyle risk index. Healthcare, some public systems are experimenting with health scores to determine treatment priority. You think you're swiping, applying, and shopping. But your emotions and mental state have already been quantified, scored, and sold. DNA Fear as a Service, outsourcing anxiety to systems. Cooper didn't face his fear. He delegated it to a calm, clinical machine. And that's where it hits home. When was the last time you had a panic spiral? Did you search how to stop anxiety fast? Download a meditation app? Try AI therapy or binaural beats? You didn't process it. You submitted it for algorithmic disposal. And in return, the system offered back a temporarily stable illusion. This is Playtest's final warning. Tech will never cure your fear. It will only offer you a smoother-looking exit. Game over. But are you still awake? 0.04 seconds. That's not just a line of dialogue. It's Playtest's tombstone. In less than the blink of an eye, Cooper's mind built an entire collapse. A spiraling journey through fear, hallucination, emotional unraveling, and identity meltdown. It was a simulated execution, but also a preview of our collective cognitive crash. You thought he died from fear overload, but the truth is harsher. He died from love, the kind he refused to face. He turned off his phone. He muted his mother's voice. And in doing so, he opened a system that doesn't let people like him come back. A world where if you don't return a feeling, you don't get to stay. Brain, if you were Cooper, what would you choose? Pushpin, if your mom called during a job interview, a tournament, a life-changing speech, would you pick up? Pushpin, if you could live a perfectly designed life inside game, at the cost of ever feeling real failure again, would you opt in? Pushpin, if a system could predict every single moment you might emotionally break, would you hand over the keys? Playtest doesn't give you answers. It just leaves the aftermath. Not a bomb, not a villain reveal. Just a normal test log, calmly filed away. You don't even get to resist. There was no knife. You walked in on your own. Microphone drop one emoji in the comments to sum up your reaction. No explanations. No filters. Movie camera. Next episode, we dive into Black Mirror Season 3, Episode 3. The entire history of you. The one where memory gets synced, downloaded, and weaponized in love and betrayal. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell. and leave something real behind. I won't rate you, but I will read you carefully.